Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Sayyid Abdul Rahman, for inviting me and letting me. So, I guess what I will do is, I don't want to come here and talk about my ideas, and because I think all of you got better ideas. Instead, what I will do is, I will give you a bit of a journey of this work that has been going through. But more importantly, just a bit of background on myself. Instead of just coming here and telling you, oh, we do this, we did that, this was our idea, this is our project, this is what we have done, and blah, blah, blah. I think what's more important that you will benefit is trying to understand how to look and review your work. Because that's really my area of expertise. That's why I don't want to come here and explain, oh, I did this, we did this, we did that. But rather, all of you are doing work. The question is, are you achieving what you want to achieve? That's number one. So usually when either a report or a proposal comes to me for a treatment program across the state, and people say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. A lot of times when I look at it and I say, you said you want to do this, why are you doing that? Same thing happens not just in the health space, but also in the social space, in the Muslim community space. A lot of people say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm doing a youth program. But then you ask, where are the youth? We are doing a youth program to counter violent extremism. Okay, but look at all these youth. They are all peaceful and middle-class youths. What are you countering? So what I'm saying is that evaluating and looking at whether you are doing what you're doing, what you want to do, whether you're achieving the impact you want to achieve, all these things are very, very critical. And fundamentally, the biggest problem we are seeing in the East as well as the West among Muslim communities is that we are not being strategic. Everybody just wants to do more activities. Everybody wants to show off the ideas, want to show off the activities, want to show off their projects. We have hundreds of millions being thrown into Islamic finance industry, Islamic banking industry, Islamic relief industry, Islamic aid industry. But then when the moment you start saying, okay, I want to review the impact, everybody is scared to, put themselves up to scrutiny. And when there is a review, a lot of times in a lot of areas of work, we're not seeing the impact that they say they want to achieve. You also don't see the impact they said they had achieved. So in our work, we really need to evaluate. And because then only you will achieve one, sustainability. If you are not going to achieve the outcomes you're going to achieve, you're not going to be sustainable. That's the most important thing. Number two, if you're not achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve, then who's going to support you? And all times, after a while, people leave. Even the very people who are working with you, they will leave. So what I will do, like I said, first part, I will just give you a narration. I'll just tell you a bit of a story about how Basmala and all this thing came about. But then I will walk you through more like a workshop on how to evaluate your work. So I will evaluate Basmala's work and try to show you how you can develop your own strategies, not just chase after more activities, more ideas, more projects. So the story really started with this regional town in Newcastle. It's about 180 kilometers from Sydney. So this is a Turkish mosque, and it's called the Sultan Fatih Mosque. When I took over to run this place, what I did was I basically looked for. They say a mosque is as good as the imams. So if you have good imams, they will bring together all the community and you will save the mosque. In this mosque, basically nobody was really interested to save the mosque because there was nothing really happening there. Okay, so what I did was I contacted some friends to see. I need English-speaking imams, alims, not just any imam. Alims who can come in a budget. My budget is only $500 per month. Okay. So anyway, we found one of my friends is from Dublin. He's doing his PhD on Pesantrans, Islamic universities in Aceh. So he told me that one of the Islamic university in Aceh has an alim, some alims who would speak English. So I said, okay, one. Then I asked another organization, Dompet Duafa, is a zakat organization. Do you have anybody, based on their budget, they usually will give money for the ustad who go abroad to do da'i. So I said, do you have anybody who is a Habib? And they had one. So he studied in Al-Azhar. So he came over. So this is the Aceh Islamic University from which the first ustad came from. Now this Islamic University is 400 years old. It is one of the oldest Islamic universities in Nusantara. It could be the oldest. We don't know yet. Alright? It's called Daya Mudi, and Mudi is Mahat Ulum Dinia Al-Islamiyah. So, as you can see, it's not in Banda Aceh. It's about 3 hours from Banda Aceh in a rice-growing area. And they have 7,000 students. All the students' pay is $5 per month. 5 Australian, which is like 15 ringgit. And they get free food, lodgings, and tuition. Or the $5 is for tuition. So they get free food and lodgings. And so the system basically works on wakaf. So anyway, with those ustads, and before they came, I had a few other, like a very short-term ustads. So the one at the top holding the old woman's hand is a Habib. His name is Habib Gais Asagaf. Habib Gais bin Abdurrahman Asagaf. So he's from Al-Azhar, and he graduated from the top faculty in Al-Azhar. He's one of the students of Ali Juma, Sheikh Ali Juma. And the one below, they all came quite short term, and the one at the end is the one from Aceh. Now, the impact that the Ustads and Habib did was phenomenal. So, with their work, so as you can see from the picture, before this mosque was just dead, right? After they came, and they came at different time, the only time where they had two Ustad was the Habib and the Aceh Ustad. And you can see, like this Ustad is teaching African kids. The Aceh Ustad, he was teaching Pakistani women, 30 of them, who never had been to classes like that.
From the area?
From the area, but it's not really, I won't say the culture, but they're really not used to going to classes. So they started coming for fiqh classes with this Aceh Ustad, but they're all Pakistani women. Basically, these Ustads started crossing the boundaries of barriers, cultural barriers. Even though they're from Indonesia, just with their English, they were able to go into the different communities and started serving them. So in terms of khidmah, they were able to... over here, you might be able to find people like that, but in the West, it's very hard. We have over 100 ethnic backgrounds in Australia. People can only serve their people. Very seldom you can see them crossing cultural boundaries. Basically in Australia, because most of the masjids there don't have alims running the masjids, we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve if we stick to the masjids. So that's when we started Basmala Australia. So Basmala Australia, Basmala referring to Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So the objective is to approach what we do with rahmah, and mercy. And what we did was, initially when we first started, we started with Basmala Academia. So Basmala Academia is a program that we started in Sydney University with the education faculty and the law faculty. So with these two faculties, what we were focusing on was chaplaincy, focusing on education issues, violent extremism issues, and so on and so forth. And what we did was, we tried to hold a lot of policy roundtables with the government people, with all from prison to police to immigration, attorney general department and everything, and try to explain to them on policies that they need to be adopting. So that's a very academic space, all right, but policy related. And then Basmala mission was, we let the Ustads continue their work. So Basmala mission was more on having Ustads. Sadly, the Basmala mission is currently kind of stopped because the Ustads, after they went to Indonesia, we haven't been able to finance them to come back. But maybe in future we'll revive it. Islamic Street University is a project that in 2015, we applied for 1-year funding from Australian government. So Australian government was having a grant program to tackle violent extremism. So they give some money to people who wanted to come up with ideas to build capacity. So we said we want to start this Islamic Street University. And the concept of Street University is a Western concept. Where basically you go to the streets, reach out to the kids in the streets and give them training and education to bring them away from harm, right? So we said we'll have an Islamic Street University, thing. And we said, we looked through the literature and also in the world and examples of Islamic Street University. We found that a very good example is Habib Munzir Musawwar in Indonesia. So what he did was, after coming from Tarim, Hadramaut, he started to go on the street and he did da'wah to the street kids and he started teaching them. So we felt that that would be the best benchmark because he was able to bring them into education. So we kind of dedicated the Islamic Street University to him, just to set a benchmark. So benchmark is very important because it kind of force you to focus on a direction. So he's our benchmark. Okay, you will never reach him, but he's a benchmark. Now, in terms of the Street University, Islamic Street University, we were not sure what we wanted to do because it's still a very new concept. So there was a time when, sorry, let me just go back. So there was a time when I went to Aceh to visit the Ustad and wanted to meet the head of the Islamic University just by chance. So I sat in front of him and I said, okay, can you give me some advice? How should I model this? I said the concept of State University doesn't have a curriculum, doesn't have a direction. It's just like do some training, do some workshops, do some education. What training, what workshop, there isn't a clear definition to that. No clear strategy. So he said something very interesting. He said, be like us, be like Dayamudi. Teach like what we teach. And I didn't quite understood what he was trying to say. It seemed too high, too big. So I said, Inshallah, I will. And then I came back. And Alhamdulillah, after I came back, since within a month and until now, I keep getting top ulamas and habaibs and sheikhs coming to Australia. And part of their work, part of the tours when they come and they teach, is teaching the kitabs which they would teach back in their universities. So then I understood, like within a month after he came, Sheikh Jibril Haddad from Brunei University came. And he launched 4 books of his books. And he taught, one of the things he did was, he did a Khatam of Shama'il Tirmidhi, 7 hours, back to back. So this is something you only get one session. This is something you get in Morocco, in Sham, Damascus. So that's where we realized, okay, so it's like bringing the very high level teaching to Sydney, where street people can walk in to join. But of course, it's not just about books, but different types of learning. And by the barakah, basically we had different habaibs, and Habib Kadim came after that, different people started coming. Ulamas came, and if you look at the slogan below, education, the most powerful social lever. In Sydney, among some of the Muslim communities, the mentality is that money is the most powerful social lever. So if I got a Mercedes, if I've got a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, then I am someone. But seriously, in Sydney, you can have a Lamborghini and a Ferrari or nothing. But these are communities that have social stratification, different social classes. So the children start getting into the mentality that I need to get into a higher social class than what I am. And in their communities, the social stratification is by money. So the richer guy is... But the real reality in the world is, especially in Australia, is education is the most powerful social lever. That is what's going to lift you up across the society. So we use that as a slogan. So here you can see Amir, he came, and these are children programs that we do. So we actually have an Alima from Indonesia who speaks English. Her father used to run the largest madrasa in Jakarta. So she has settled in Sydney. So she runs a children's program, Quran program, and anyway, whenever we try to bring in visiting scholars and habaibs to sit down and conduct sessions. So that's Habib Abdurrahman. So he did a session with them. So the kids were like between 4 to 10 years old, but they asked a lot of questions because over there they train the kids. So our objective is like to start very early, not wait until. This is Sheikh Nur Kabani. So he came and he did one session. This is Sheikh Musab. So by the time Sheikh Musab came, we had a Silat program started. So the kids did Silat. We've done a converts session. This is actually a converts forum, but this is the Ismail Tirmidhi Khatam session. So then after the 7 hours, Sheikh Jibril gave the ijazahs. So, and this is the sanad of the ijazah. This is a Hall Haddad that we did with Habib Kadim. Ami was there. Now, this is just the narrative. Now I'll try to, break it into a more informal session, more like a workshop. What's more important is the world where we live today is complex. The society is complex. The social issues is complex. The youth issues are complex. The health issues are complex. So how do you achieve outcomes in a complex situation? And it's not about ideas. It's not about how much you do. It's not about how many projects you do. It's about how strategic you are. So that's basically what I want to, and to see how strategic you are is how you assess how strategic you are. You have to keep assessing, evaluating yourself, all right? And the first thing you need to note, being strategic, it is based on wisdom, hikmah, knowledge, ilmu, and being systematic. Okay, these are three important things. Now, let me give you a background to the Australian Muslim community. So, a lot of times people say, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Okay, to who? For example, if you talk to a lot of Australian Muslim organizations, you say Muslims. Which Muslims? What Muslims? Because out of 600,000 Muslims, they will say like, oh, don't do on this side of Sydney because the Muslims are here. Do only in Sydney because the Muslims are not there. So you say like, but what Muslims? So you need to refer to the demography in the sense that sometimes in their head, they just talk about the people they deal with, the communities they deal with, the segment of the population they deal with. But the segment of the population they deal with could be only 5%. Like when I was in Newcastle, everybody keep talking about the masjid. I said, why you keep talking about the masjid? There are 3,000 Muslims, okay? Only about like 400 Muslims come to the masjid. Maybe you reach about 1,000 Muslims, including the family. But 2,000 Muslims are not even reached by the masjid. So when you talk about Muslim, you have to talk about the 3,000 Muslims in the town. Not just my masjid, the people who come to masjid. It's more than that. Because when they die, they come to the masjid. So they are included, right? So when you talk about, the other thing is that it's not a uniform community. You got Lebanese, Iraqis, Pakistanis, Afghans who make up the majority. But there are more than 100 backgrounds, So it's a very diverse community. And when people say, oh, no, the Muslims like this or the Muslims don't like that, which Muslims like this and which Muslims don't like that? or Muslims will not accept this. Which Muslims will accept this and which Muslims will not accept that? So, and then how they arrived into Australia. Two ways. One group arrived as skilled migrants, all right, and one group came as refugees. And some of them are born for parents who came as skilled migrants, and some of them are born to parents who came as refugees. And it is quite a different profile, different community. And then you have highly literate Muslims and lowly literate Muslims. And one thing very, very interesting about the Australian Muslim community is more than half of the Muslims are below 30 years. A majority of those below 30 years are below 21 years, school age. But a lot of times when Muslim leaders and imams in Australia keep talking about Muslims, they keep talking about adults. When they do things, it's all about the adults. But more than half the community is below 30 years old. And community objectives, the lay Muslims generally is buy a house, get a car, donate to mosque building, donate to Islamic relief agency. Every time, a disaster, Indonesia, there's a tsunami, donate now in the next 24 hours. Okay. And then go to Hajj and Umrah, be active in Ramadan, chase after a Muslim identity. Everybody is chasing after a Muslim identity in Australia. And a very narrow definition of da'wah. And this is very interesting because is this the practice of Islam in the West? Should it be narrowed down to just that? This was a very interesting discussion I was having with an alim who is very familiar with the West, a Malaysian alim. So he was saying, is this really what Islam really taught us to do? Is this what practicing Islam really all about? And in terms of the leaders and imams, it's like build more mosques, start halal certification agency, start Islamic relief agency. There's a lot of political groups, Ikhwanis, different types of Ikhwanis. There's Malaysian Ikhwani groups, 2 or 3. They are from here, they're now going there to recruit more and more. They're spending a lot of money recruiting. You've got, Egyptian aligned Muslim Brotherhood groups, Iraqi aligned Muslim Brotherhood groups, Salafi groups, Hizb ut-Tahrir. So, if you want to see all of them, just go to Facebook. They're very busy every day trying to build a Khalifa online. And they're always recruiting members for the organizations, the leaders and the imams, because their existence relies on how much they can recruit. So recruitment is a big activity for them. Again, chase after Muslim identity. When you talk about da'wah, it's very narrow. Now, I lived 6 years in Canada before I moved to Australia and lived for the last 10 years. What I'm saying is quite common in the Western world. And it's it's a very different experience to Muslims who migrated to non-Muslim countries in the East. So if you look at Muslims who went to Vietnam or Laos 100 years ago, 200 years ago, settled among non-Muslims, how did they build their community? It's very, very different to how Muslims have gone to the West to build their communities. And that is something to think about, actually. Now, generally, Muslims who do really well in the West, and Muslims who don't do well in terms of outcomes, do really poorly. And this is a very big, I'm setting the context. So, in terms of negative community level outcomes, in Australia, Muslims make up about 2.5% of the population, but then 12% of the prison population. Within the juvenile, when you talk about juvenile, I think it's below 18, right? Juvenile crime rate and imprisonment, Muslims have very high rate. I met one of my program for Basmala. We have a boxing program for youths going to prison and coming out from prison. So I met one youth who was 29 years old with a 10-year-old daughter. And for the last 11 years or something, he's been in and out of prison. And and those are kind of issues there. And we got about 400 Muslims who are on surveillance by counter-terrorism authorities. So, quite recently we had one of them commit attack in Melbourne, go on the street. Now there's high divorce rate, high rates of domestic violence. The Muslim leadership is in constant competition and rivalry and trying to, attack one another and bring down one another. And it's very fractured. Socially, you can find the Muslims who are not doing very well in terms of outcomes, very socially excluded. They live in enclaves. There's a very high dependency on Salafi Saudi money and very, very low number of alims. Right? So I'm just setting the complex community conditions. Right? So if you want to intervene in a community like this, you want to do something, you want to do da'wah, you want to focus on education or social or youth issue, it's not about, if I go around the table and I say, what do you want to do? Each one of us will have a different idea, different, strategy, for example. But the thing is, there is a systematic way to look at certain, of trying to design an intervention, okay? First thing you ask is, what is the perspective you want to use to try and understand the issue? Number two, have you defined the problem clearly? Right? So what is the essence of the problem? The problem can take different forms, but what is the essence of the problem you want to deal with? Right? Who is the target audience and recipients you want to reach? And what are the objective outcomes? We're not talking about outputs, we're talking about outcomes. And what's the reference or the basis for the strategy? And lastly, what are you going to monitor for the impact? Now, let's try, what is the perspective used? This is quite it might sound very simple for you all coming from Malaysia, because this is pretty much it, right? But a lot of times, in a different context from what you're doing, what is the perspective you're using? You might not have thought about it, because it's very important to first identify what perspective you want to use, right? For example, I used to work in alcohol research in health. So this, because Australia has a high rate of alcohol harms. So basically, there's a lot of money that the government pours to reduce these alcohol harms, alcohol-related driving, alcohol-related violence, and so on and so forth. So one day a friend came to me, he said, what do you do? I said, I work in the alcohol research area. Oh, just bring your Quran and tell them alcohol is haram. I was like, no, you can't do that, because the perspective is different. It's a public health perspective. If it's that simple, I will do it. If I'm talking to a Muslim community, I can do it. If I'm talking to the Australian society, I can't just pick up a Quran and show and say, alcohol is haram. That's it. So the perspective is very important, and a lot of times the perspective that you identify will shape what you're doing. So, like for instance, Sunni. For us in the West, if you don't identify that we want to take a Sunni perspective, along the way when we are doing things, people bring in all kind of, they want to bring in non-Sunni perspectives, Wahhabi perspective, whatever perspectives, So identifying that is very clear, needs to be very clear. And number two is the Ghazalian, Nagibian, meaning Nagib al-Atas, in terms of education. Tasawwuf was Naqshbandi and Ba'alawi. And then we kind of adopted some perspective in terms of evaluation, which I'm going through. Engagement with government, how to engage with government, why you should engage with government, where not to engage with government, things like that. And mix of Western and Islamic perspective of community engagement. This is quite a tough area. People don't imagine, they assume if I do something, I am engaging the community. It's not that simple, right? People in Da'wah will understand this better. Or rather, I would say people who are in khidmah, doing service, they will understand even better, because community engagement is one of the hardest areas, right? And basically the whole thing is avoid relying on your perspective. I think that's where it boils down to. So part of being strategic is to avoid relying on your perspective and being very clear on what perspective you're using. Right? Now, a lot of times in the area of health, people say, okay, we've designed this intervention. In the youth intervention, in the Muslim community or non-Muslim community, they always say, oh, we're going to do this. And then we always say, so what is the problem you're trying to tackle? What is the problem really that your intervention is trying to address? And often they start telling you, like for example, oh, there's violent extremism, there's mafia, there's gangs, there's drug trade, there's drug addiction, there's social, like basically these are all symptoms, right? So what is really the problem? The way we define it is that there's a missing Sunni scholarship and knowledge system. That's what's really the missing Sunni stabilizers. If you look at Muslim community throughout history, it's not always been a smooth journey, smooth ride. History of Islam, you have these Sunni stabilizers, and that's very, very important to acknowledge. You have the scholars who tell you what to do and give you direction or whatever, but also the stabilizers. So this is a very interesting topic. When Habib Kadim came in, we organized a policy seminar in Sydney University, and he was presenting to government people and academics. So they were all one of the very common questions that they had in their mind was, what is Yemen got to do with Islamic scholarship? What's so great about Yemen? What's so special about Yemen? Because Yemen is a country that's always been in conflict in the last 40, 50 years with wars and civil wars and North Yemen, South Yemen. So, and one of the things, so basically in that seminar I presented first on the Ba'alawi tradition in Southeast Asia and how it's contributed to stability, progress, and a lot of different areas of good outcomes. And one of the things that I highly emphasized was how the Ba'alawis were one type of stabilizers. So when there were conflicts in Southeast Asia, or when Islam came into a very turbulent religious settings, the Ba'alawis were kind of stabilizers. And when Habib Kadim talked about how Imam Muhajir, when he came from Basra into Tarim, to Yemen, Yemen was a very turbulent place, and he brought stability. And throughout the history, so it's very interesting because we keep talking about the Sunni scholarship as how they develop things and so on and so forth. But what equally important is the Sunni stabilizers, because today we often think that we need just somebody new, somebody this, somebody that, But we often don't think about who are the stabilizers, because we live in a very turbulent and a conflict-ridden world, community level. Like for example, Malaysia is a good example. There's so many conflicts happening, but who are the stabilizers? So it's quite a big area to focus on. So anyway, I think the missing Sunni stabilizers applies to both Australia and Malaysia also. And the loss of adab, which is kind of thing. Now, the other interesting question to ask in a lot of in this area, but which kind of could apply to your area is leadership really the problem, or is a lack of scholarship the problem? So in the Australian government has been trying to pursue the promotion of leadership in the Muslim community. So they train young people and all that to become leaders. They spend a lot of money. Our Basmala's take is leadership is not the problem. We have many leaders. We don't have a shortage of leaders. We have a shortage of scholars. So even when leaders, we don't have enough informed leaders. So this is a kind of an interesting and important question. I don't know whether governments will accept that scholarship is more important than leadership for a community. But for an Islamic community, I think it's a bit clearer. Scholarship is more important than leadership. So Muslim communities that has invested more in developing scholarship, protecting scholarship has been more stable than Muslim communities has been chasing after leadership. More than half of the time in Muslim history, the leadership has never been stable. But then you could always stabilize a community when you have strong scholarship. But here you see, when we're talking about how you define the problem clearly, really affects what you're going to pursue. Is it a leadership or scholarship? It might sound like a very simple question, but you will go down very different roads, right? A community that doesn't have a good scholarship and a community that doesn't have a good leadership, both could be rudderless. The word rudderless was actually a Christian theology professor. He coined it to describe the condition of the Muslim community in Australia. He said the Muslim community is rudderless. It's just going all directions. Doesn't know where it's going, what he wants to do. And of course, the government, but also a lot of the people, a lot of community leaders and so on, they believe there is a leadership crisis. They think that if we have better leaders, we can solve all the problems. And they're always chasing after the best leader, relentlessly. They're just not giving up. And they believe that, he can be a good leader. And then when he doesn't do it, throw him. He could be a leader. Not then maybe she, maybe he. But then when you look at, you have so many leaders that you're trying and experimenting, but where are the scholars that you need to be producing? Now, in our case, the target audience and recipients, this is quite an important thing because like earlier, I told you about how more than half or about half of the Australian Muslim population is below 30 years old. So, we keep talking about Muslim need this, Muslim in the mosque. But when the children and the young people are not coming to the mosque, you're missing out, the Muslim, half of the Muslim audience. So, like in Malaysia, for instance, I can find is people keep talking about, we are doing this, we are doing that. But then you're just reaching out to the urban Malay population. You are missing out on the rural Malay population in some of the strategies. In some of the strategies, they are reaching out to the rural Malay population. They are missing out on the urban Malay population. Recently, a scholar came to Malaysia and he came back and he was telling me, he said, there is such a big demand for activities in urban Malaysia to be in English. A lot of Malay youths are very comfortable in hearing about Islamic talks and teaching in English, but there's not enough. There's always emphasis in the Malay. And at the same time, another person was telling me about how a lot of activities about the university and things, the conference and seminars are happening in the KL area. But what about the rural area? Why are things not moving into the rural area? So I think in terms of what is the target audience is very, very critical. Once you miss the target audience, you're going to miss a great deal of the impact, the outcomes that you want to achieve. And coming to this big thing about outcomes or outputs. So what's an output, what's an outcome? You see, this is quite important in the sense that output is really, look at it, input, output. So what you put in, like for example, the hours that you do and whatever, the output, I do an event, for example, this thing. What's the output here? The output is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people coming. That's an output. The input is the time we put in and things like that. Maybe $100 we spend on coffee and food or whatever. I'm just saying. That's the input, output. But is there 8 or 9 people who come here, is that the impact? That's not the impact. So the outcome is what we will say, something that you can basically measure in terms of impact. So, for example, a heightened understanding of how to design interventions, or even better, 5 new projects coming from people, or people rescuing their projects, or people improving the sustainability of the projects who come here. So that's an outcome. So in a lot of times, a lot of Muslims, when they are organizing community level interventions or activity, strategies, they keep talking about output. They say, oh, we have 100 people come, 2,000 people come, 5,000 people come. We raised this much of money. We built this many mosques. We built the biggest mosque. Or we did Ramadan. Oh my God, look at the number of people who came. So they keep talking about output, 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 output. So the output is not the impact. Alright? So you need to really, really know the difference between these two, because you can have amazing output and very poor outcomes. People always say, so how many people came for your event? I say it depends on the event. If my event is such that I need 5 critical minds to come, that's enough. That's a good outcome. But I find it 500 people, then that's a poor outcome, right? But in terms of output, I have 5 people. People might say, "Oh, it's just a poor output." Well, it could be a poor output, but it's not a poor outcome. You get what I mean? So we have, for example, there's 2, 4, 6, 7, 8 people here. It's a poor output. It's okay. I'm just saying. But what is a good output? 50 people standing room? So, like an event like this, how many people are going to come? Let's assume 8 is a poor output. Let it be. But if 3 of you go back tomorrow and reform your projects to make it strong, that's a very good outcome, right? I can have 50 fellas come here, drink coffee and go home and forget everything that I said. That's a good output and a horrible outcome. Now, what is the reference? A lot of times people say, I'm doing this. What's your reference? What's your basis for your strategy? Who told you it's a good idea? I've got an idea. Who told you it's a good idea? So for us, like I say, for us referring to Daya Mudi and asking, what in the world should we be doing as a Islamic State University? And they were our reference. They were the basis. So for example, today when I'm coming and telling you I did this, well, they were the one who told me to do this. Abu Mudi, his name, the head of Mudi. And of course, we have other references and bases. A lot of times I find a lot of people are doing things with really no clear reference. It's just everybody has an idea. Social media encourages everybody to have their own idea. A lot of, in the Western world also, there's one part which is a bit more systematic, one part is very, it just loves promoting everybody to go and do their own things, and he's got a great idea, And there's the kind of marketing mediums to promote everyone. And very often people with the great ideas, but with very little impact, do get a lot of attention. So what's happening is what's important for the reference is it sets benchmarks. For example, one of the references, Habib Munzir, right? So benchmarking is very, very important. So what we want to do, because it holds yourself responsible, so that another person can come and say, isn't Habib Munzir your reference? Why are you not focusing on your street children? Why are you just focusing on middle class kids? Why aren't you not focusing on tasawwuf? Or why not focusing on this? Why not? So the reference also allows other people to question you, scrutinize you. Number 2, it also forces people you work with to move in a certain direction. Today somebody was asking this question to Habib Abdul Rahman. Is it, how do you get 8 people or 10 people to keep moving in the same direction or share the same goals over time? What happens if the main guy dies? Main 2 guys dies, 3 guys dies. 3 guys who bring together the 10 people. So one of the things is very important is the reference. If the 10 people have a shared reference, shared teachers, for instance, then pretty much, it doesn't matter if 3% drop out, 2% drop out, they keep going in how did Daya Mudi last for 400 years? Aceh had 200, maybe 100 odd years of Dutch rule, which was very oppressive, very disruptive. After that, they had 30 years of civil war. The 30 years of civil war in Aceh was so disruptive. But then Aceh continued. Daya Mudi is not the only one. There are several, about 300 to 400-year-old pasantrans. So how did they all exist? Today when the head of one Islamic university or college or seminary or an organization, when he dies, the whole thing collapses, right? And this has been going on for 400 years. How did they do it? So all these things, we really need to pay attention in terms of how to let it continue. And reference is a very important one part of that. Everybody have different references. It's also chaos. You need to have a shared reference. And then the other one is, what are you going to monitor for impact? Again, there's short term and there's long term, and there's medium term. Like for example, short term, you are looking more in terms of how well we could reach the youths and the families and the converts in Sydney. That was our short term goal. Short term monitoring indicators. Like, are we reaching? Are we only reaching Nusantara families? Are we able to reach into Arab families? Are we able to reach into South Asian families? Are we able to reach into South African families? Medium term is like how we are able to progress more into education and community building. So, because like I say, short term, I think it's about connection. It's about, if you can't connect, then don't talk about, achieving the outcomes. And this is more relevant to us. But this is what we keep observing, monitoring for impact. So as long as we are getting there, we are happy about it. For us, we have a lot of things to achieve. We're still very young, this is very new. I guess what's more important is like when you're looking at the speed at which you're running. For example, for us, I was just mentioning, for us to achieve the medium-term goal, for us to just focus on Australia, we're not going to achieve it. So at the moment, what we're doing is that we're focusing a bit on Indonesia and Malaysia also. So inshallah, we want to do a bit more work in Malaysia and Indonesia. But just to wrap up, I think I'm not really interested to come and share about my work or Basmala work or whatever. I'm more interested to come and give some, I won't say skills, but training, because this is an area I work in professionally also, and I bring that over to my Basmala work, community work. And I've run all this through with alims and ulamas and sheikhs and habaibs, and they've very strongly supported me in this. But the thing about the Islamic way of doing things strategically is not very well documented. It's a lot of hikmah, and in Islamic way of doing things strategically, they don't sit down and document and say, this is why I do this is why I do that. It's very often people like outside of that, reflecting on it, who are the ones who sit down and say, the reason why they did that was because of it. So it's a bit hard to explain.